Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Halloween edition of the Dumb Film Critics Society podcast. I'm here with Spencer, who may be a more frequent guest, especially in the podcast now. We all have busy lives, but I think Aiden, as a master's student, has an even busier life. And so Spencer is back on the show. We're going to talk about some of the films that we've seen together. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing these glasses, this was me and my girlfriend's couple's costume. We were other father and other mother from Coraline. I don't know if you picked up on that, Spencer, but
I had a feeling.
Yeah.
That movie terrified me as a kid.
Yeah. Well, here are the button glasses. But I can't really take credit for making these, or the idea actually either. But I found a really sick robe that I'll show you later, Spencer, for the costume. And, it worked out. So, but the thing is, you can't see with those, and I feel like, you know, this would be a key part of the costume, though we didn't end up going to that party I mentioned because it was late. We're here to talk about some of the films we've seen together. We've been, you know, going down our watch list via the Criterion collection a little bit, and trying to watch some classic, important, highly rated films. So obviously these are some pretty highly rated, but I guess we're kind of doing this in a ranked list, and we're kind of going from best to worst, because I feel like the best films, I feel like we maybe, it's like interchangeable. Like, I feel like on a different year or different feeling might rate one or the other higher. Though I think maybe our bottom two, not including the one that isn't part of the Criterion collection, which I guess we'll briefly touch on, are maybe a little weaker than the other ones, in our opinions. More because they had a bizarre element or just something we didn't expect that didn't hit as hard. But anyways, I guess. And Spencer, you can obviously object if this is not your ranking, because I don't think we have the exact same ranking.
I might take a few different, approaches. Similarly, I think we have the same first and last, but it's just the middle few that I would sort of change the order of.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess my number one, and I'm guessing your number one then, because we're looking at the same list, was La Haine.
Yeah.
So,
La
film
Haine
starring Vincent Cassel, Hubert Conde, and unfortunately they're all French names. I'm not going to butcher anymore. Actually, you're the guy who speaks a little bit of French. You should be doing this.
No, but Saïd isn't a French name. The
True.
guy who plays.
Yes, they are. From diverse backgrounds.
Directed by Mathieu Kassovitz.
Yes, who hasn't really made another film nearly as substantial, which is an interesting bit about this. La Haine is 18th ranked on Letterboxd in total. It is one of obviously the most acclaimed films made of all time. I'm pretty certain it's in the AFI's top 100 of all time. Sorry, BFI is what I meant to say, but sure, I don't know if AFI made. Actually, AFI probably wouldn't put it in. It's not American. But I think that would be there, probably.
Oh, and if not yet, it will be one day, I think.
Yeah. No, I think
it's one of those
has been, but yeah.
Those films that's only going to become more and more relevant, I guess, with time.
Yeah.
Not that it ever wasn't relevant, but it's never going to lose its importance, I don't think.
No, I think it very much stands up to changing times. As much as we want to say they changed, you can see a lot of things in common with what has been happening in the world, just with conflict between police state and marginalized communities. Fortunately, something that's been pretty continuous, especially in the Western world. One of the greater weaknesses of democracy, I guess you could point to it as, and I mean, films are still continually made about these kind of issues of these groups, issues with the police and issues with each other as well. Obviously, it's not trying to say that it's simply people versus the police either. I think that's clearly put into perspective. I think obviously the way they tell these stories of these young adults who are in pretty crappy situations overall and want ultimately what's best for each other, but it feels like there's almost no escape from their situation. But yeah, so three friends are basically wandering around Paris, waiting for the news of their friend who was seriously injured in a incident with the police. Starts off with a very impressive and impactful scene with that's the fire at the someone starts a fire at the police station, right? I'm pretty sure that's how it begins. Which you can see also draws a parallel to the film Athena, if anyone has seen that, made in 2022, also a French film. I think very much drawing inspiration from this, so you can see this film like does, has influenced a lot of other films as well. I think what impacted both of us, besides its obviously impactful stories, I think almost every opportunity he uses this pretty grounded story that to still do some very convoluted and interesting camera moves, which I think very much speak to the kind of mental experience that they're going through, even though they're always trying to, appear very tough and not let their feelings show on the surface. You can tell that obviously these characters are going through it emotionally, and obviously that comes out usually in anger, as the title kind of implies, with the hate being the title of the film. But do you have anything to add?
I think what is so sort of impressive about it, at least in my opinion, is that it appeals to people who enjoy film, and it appeals to the movie lovers because you have such unique uses of camera shots, and even that one scene that we were sort of curious about earlier where they almost use a helicopter to sort of zoom out. And so to those people who are into film, you have lots to see and lots to focus on. But it's not just an art house film in the sense that what you were talking about. It appeals to communities and appeals to people who maybe have gone through similar experiences. And it's not too out there in terms of filmmaking that it necessarily pushes people away. Like I found that I don't know how long it is, an hour 40, 100 minutes, something like that. I found that it just vanished. Yeah, like it just went by so quickly. Like the story is just so compelling. So I think it's pretty cool how he's managed to make something that can appeal to both, lovers of film, but also just, the average viewer, once you can get over the fact that it's subtitled, which I know is a hurdle for some people, but once you can get over that, there's such a really, I'm not going to say heartwarming story because it's really not a heartwarming story, but there's such a gripping story, I guess is the way that I would put it, beyond just the interesting filmmaking choices. And for me, that's what makes it, I think, my favorite of the list, is because some of the other films that we've seen together are maybe less so appealing to more sorts of people and less focused on the story, and more focused on the filmmaking. And I think when a movie is able to do both at the same time, that's the sign that it really is a important and monumental piece of media.
Yeah, I think it takes that very you see a lot of influences both from kind of, I guess, like hip hop and rap culture, in some of the music and some of the kind of the instances I guess you would sometimes stereotypically associate, like the kind of events you would stereotypically associate with marginalized, diverse communities. But like it brings an authentic voice to each character, I feel, and they're all intelligent. They all you understand why they do what they do, even if they're often guided by emotions. But you understand why they're in such a high emotional state, and you want to go along with that, even when they are doing something silly like that one scene where they go to collect money from that guy, and then he's like hopped up on cocaine, and then they get kicked out of the building and everything, and then they miss a train. Like all of those, I feel like are relatable things to basically like maybe not the cocaine part, meeting a cocaine guy, but like missing the train, or like a meetup that goes wrong, slash a business deal that goes wrong. Like these are like typical things that I think happens for ordinary people, but it's put in this specific context where you understand why things become such a high conflict. So high emotions are running through all these scenes. Yeah, and of course revolutionary filmmaking combined with that, I think, along with lots of interesting influences, like the choice to shoot this in black and white. It looks very clean. Still, like for a night, especially for it's a '90s film, so it's like a little more recent than some of the other films we are going to be talking about, but it uses that cleaner aesthetic and that black and white aesthetic though very effectively. I think it feels both modern and like timeless at the same time. I think it combines what you want from a more modern black and white, more modern black and white film really well. Yeah, pretty great movie. One that like I think you could throw on with most people, and I think they get something out of it, even if they don't love it as much as we did. I think you would get something out of it. I think it would, it challenges the viewer. Definitely at some point, and sometimes challenges empathy, but still connects with you.
And at the end of the day, it's still just a very compelling story from a narrative perspective, in my opinion. Even though it's really just three guys kind of walking around, screwing around and trying to steal cars and just do all this, sort of nonsense. It's still, he makes it such a compelling movie because the characters are so real. And we've all met people who, I mean, most of us, I would imagine, have met people who act in similar ways, and sort of, we've at least seen a lot of people who feel like these characters. And so, the narrative, while simple, is just it just feels so real. And I find it so easy to attach to these characters. And you can kind of watch and see as their fuses keep getting shorter and shorter, and as they get more and more angry, and there's more hate in them. And so to I think every viewer, there's at least something that you can grab onto there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, like in some ways it's also just like a hangout movie, but with like stakes you can see at every corner. There's tension in almost every scene, especially once the gun shows up. That adds to it. Yeah, it's like literally Chekhov's gun, but throughout like 3/4 of this film. Like after the first act, he has the gun the whole time, and that gun's going to go off. You just don't know when or why, and it obviously keeps you gripped by what's going on.
Yeah.
All right. I guess we'll talk about the next film. Well, I'll do my number 2, and then you can say what ranking you would put it at. I had M by Fritz Lang at number 2. This is a film that's also very much stuck with me. It obviously, it's a 1931 film, so a pretty old film, relatively speaking. We're talking about almost 100 years ago now, 94 years ago. And obviously, I think it just holds up incredibly well. I think the filmmaking is pretty masterful. The way it uses shadows and a lot of other techniques, I guess, is now associated especially with film noir, is pretty masterful. Also in black and white, and leading to kind of a conclusion that really provokes a lot of thought out of the viewer. It's something that I've thought of in my philosophy of law classes. Like, I think it's very relevant to anyone who's thinking about law and morality consistently, or just, when it just runs into you when you see the news and you see a character like this, you are often wondering, like, how do we solve an issue like that? And obviously the film doesn't try to provide clear answers, but it obviously, doesn't let you just think, oh, he's a bad guy, so he just gets whatever he deserves based on what the characters think. There's like a pushback against that, and like a stronger conflict into everyone kind of having to look at their own minds and thinking, like, what are my own vices? You know, what do I do wrong that I like? What am I compelled to do that I shouldn't do, but always just end up kind of doing? Obviously, that's taken to the extreme with this character, but I think that feeling is pretty universal. Where I think most people can relate to not wanting to do something because it's bad for you, but still end up doing it, regretting it, but still probably doing it later in the future. It's a pretty, I think, universal human experience, and it challenges your empathy to the strongest extent with this character, but it's also a pretty tense police procedural um, and film overall. Like how they capture him in the first place is very interesting.
I totally see where you're coming from, but I sort of almost saw it in slightly different light. Now I don't have it as high up on the list as you would. I think I would actually have it at number 4.
Okay.
Which is no, insult to this movie. The movies that we've seen together have all been phenomenal. You could almost argue any number of them could be number 1, except maybe the exception of Black Phone 2 and that masterpiece of a movie. But what I think is really cool about M is you can almost look at it as a prelude, sort of, to the horror genre and almost the slasher genre of horror movies that kind of emerge in the 70s. Sort of the way that we never really see the killer. You don't see anything happen. All you hear is the whistling, and the way that Fritz Lang is able to use such bare bone technology and bare bone sort of storytelling to still have such a scary character. Like I found, when you hear In the Hall of the Mountain King, and for the rest of my life, this song will stick with me. It sort of just instills this element of fear, and you can see the same sort of thing in Halloween, in John Carpenter when he made that movie, and he has the Halloween theme, and anytime you hear it, you know that Michael Myers is nearby. So I think this movie is really interesting to look at as a sort of like the foundation almost, and you can make the argument that it was the beginning of this genre that would come 40 years later. I mean, we didn't see horror movies really. I guess, we have Alfred Hitchcock and Psycho, which came before Halloween, but I think this definitely you could make the argument that as a prelude to horror, it's a very interesting movie to watch, and it's cool to watch it from that sort of perspective, with, of course, taking into account that there are so many ethical and, philosophical issues of law that you were talking about. I just don't happen to be studying philosophy of law, so it appealed to me slightly less as somebody who does love the horror genre, and I like slasher movies. That's kind of what I went. I was like, oh, this is horror. This is awesome. This is bare bone horror movie making, and so I thought it was pretty cool how they used In the Hall of the Mountain King. I think that's the highlight of the movie for me. It's the way that you just hear that ominous whistling and the balloon floating up. I mean, even the balloon. Stephen King comes back to use a similar sort of balloon when he's writing It. The influences of M, I think, they're everywhere. I mean, when you're making a movie in the 30s, obviously, if it is successful, it's going to be influential. That's just the nature of how young filmmaking is. But it's still, very cool to sort of take this movie and look at the impact it had on horror going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I got out of it, at least.
Yeah. I think also the acting from the killer at the end is very good. And yeah,
Peter
you get
Moore, I believe is his name.
Yeah, you also, like, it has, I think, a lot of interesting things to say about kind of mob mentality and, like, this kind of community thing.
Definitely.
It actually relates a little bit to, I think, weapons, which I guess we should also technically include on this list since we also saw it together, but...
oh, yeah.
But the way that, yeah, like the...
And I guess...
Yeah, that's true. But I think the way that, a community comes around children can both be terrifying and obviously a good thing. Obviously, you want to see children supported. Like, it's like, people sometimes say it takes a village, but at the same time, a village can also tear anyone who they want apart. And I think it warrants a lot to that kind of idea. Obviously, the film doesn't want you to question whether this person's guilty or not. That's kind of left definitively as a yes, he's guilty of these things. But also it's interesting how vigilante justice and like work outside the law, again, a very philosophy of law type of topic, but like action outside the law is taken here, and the way that the community become so paranoid and distrustful of each other, and soon like no single, especially man, you know, is left alone and is considered a suspect. Again, kind of I guess playing into the very gendered ideas we have of our world, which, the one area where men get the short area of the stick is, but it's also statistically true that we are more likely to commit violent crimes, and so that's, again, something that's kind of like you can see that lasting into every Western society now, and is to the way that, people are distrustful of each other, and especially given like when things violent and horrific incidents happen, which you can obviously see unfortunately a lot in some countries, including ours at times, of course, here in Canada. But yeah, it really speaks to a society kind of breaking down and becoming very desperate to solve this issue, and basically willing to throw away a lot of law and order, to the point where, like, the whole bit is that a criminal organization has to step in. They become kind of the good guys in order to solve this issue. It's like such grave an issue that, people the police have been hunting all of a sudden have to kind of work together almost unknowingly, in order for this to get resolved. And I think just all of those elements of the story just really, I think, are pretty timeless at this point. I think it's held up incredibly well. And like you said, the bare bones filmmaking, kind of horror parts of it also works so well today, and make this still a pretty entertaining movie, especially given its time period. But it's still paced incredibly well and has so many memorable elements that I also think I would rewatch this at any point, or anyone who's like interested in any of these topics, I'd want to show it to them.
Yeah. I think my only complaint is I felt the sort of middle scenes almost dragged a little bit, personally. I thought some aspects of it to me did feel a little bit slow, but then, it also could have just been the sort of the place that I was in when I was watching it, because especially with these older movies, if you're not necessarily in the perfect headspace for them, it's easy for them to just feel sort of slower. So it's no sort of discredit to the movie. I just found parts of it for me dragged the slightest little bit. But overall, I think all of your commentary still stands and is very true. It's definitely timeless, and I think people are going to be watching this for years.
Yeah, I think another century is probably in order for this. I think history kind of tells us these similar things happen to most societies. Distrust amongst the community is inevitable, even after it's been established over years, and I think that's only going to continue. I forgot, we should, I guess, throw out ratings for these films as we go along. Give them the credit they're due.
Oh yeah, we can do that.
Our little canon. I gave both of these films a 9 out of 10. Both La Haine and M. I don't know if you wanna.
I gave La Haine a 10 out of 10. I think that movie is deserving of 5 stars. And then I gave M an 8 out of 10. Those are my 2 ratings there.
All right.
Although I am definitely much more willing to give something a 5 out of 5 or a 10 out of 10 than I think you are.
Yeah, as of late, I don't know. I've been very selective with what I've been giving a 10 out of 10. Mostly because I feel like I want to rewatch most of the things that I would potentially consider 10 out of 10s. Like La Haine and M are definitely up there as, I think, potential 10 out of 10s. I would want to watch them again.
I suppose on a rewatch too, it could change things.
Yeah, no, for sure. You got to consider that. A lot of these films, I think, are meant to be, can be very different experiences on a second watch, based on their very thoughtful content. I think the same could probably go for my number 3. Well, my number 3 was Close Up.
Which happened to be my number 2.
Okay. Directed by Abbas Kiarostami. It's a very interesting film, especially for its time. It's very meta in a way that we see a lot more today than I think we did at this point. But it's a fiction documentary hybrid that uses the real life event where a man pretended to be Film director Muhsin, I'm gonna butcher his name so bad. Muhsin
Makbala, I think.
Makbalov, yeah.
Makbala, I think, is what it
Okay.
is.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. As the basis for a stunning multi-layered investigation of movies, identity, artistic creation, existence, in which the real people from the case play themselves. Actually, pretty different. Actually, it has similar themes to the other film I saw from him. I'm becoming a big fan of Abbas Kiarostami overall, and this will definitely be one of the reasons why.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I watched his other film called Certified Copy. That was very good. It touches on some of the themes of like art and authenticity. Like I think it's very interesting. A lot of his films kind of look at the nature of art itself. Kind of here we have the way that I think art kind of is respected, at least in Iranian society, especially like I think the whole concept is that this guy pretends to be a film director, and all of a sudden before, when people would ignore him, this family treats him like an important, worthy person to listen to. And though he commits basically no crime, like he borrows a little bit of money, I don't think even a substantial amount, especially considering the family's socioeconomic status, doesn't really matter in a court case, or shouldn't relatively matter. But it's obviously still brought into court, and it's very interesting that like the idea that all these people, including the guy who pretended to be the director, came and made this film with Abbas Kiarostami and, you know, helped to recreate all these things. Because in that way, you kind of see that like this whole ploy kind of worked for him. Like he is now part of Iranian cinema history. He is part of the canon, which is kind of what he seemed to want in the first place as an admirer of Iranian cinema. Which is a really interesting thing to think about, just with the nature of him being in theory a fraud, but him also being able to like pass off his artistic ideas as real to these people, you know, like kind of
even though he is a fraud.
Yeah, like kind of
showing fraud with air quotations, you know.
Yeah, we did this in a double feature with F for Fake, which I guess we'll talk about later, but it, you know, both very much touch on like art being very much kind of a form that like where authenticity, while very valued and talked about a lot, can really be like it's an element where you can be pretty dishonest with the way you present art, and what you think of art can be completely changed by one person just being like, hey, you know, this person wasn't a real person or something, or like this is not a real person. Like there's another documentary called My Child Could Paint This that looks at like the children's art fanatics that happen, where like a lot of children's art was like auctioning for hundreds of thousands of dollars, but that like, you know, anyone could paint that, like, you know, anyone's child could in theory paint that, but for whatever reason they've been deemed like masterpieces by the art world and all of a sudden are worth a lot of money, kind of showing how like the subjectivism and who has the power to say what is art is very interesting, because, you know, the whole time the family thinks, oh, he's someone who has the authority to say what art is, and so we're going to follow him along in whatever this vision is, as long as it's not too crazy. And he never asks anything too crazy of them.
No, he's quite reasonable.
Yeah, like he's not like trying to take their estate or like work his way into the will. It's like the opposite of Parasite, where like instead of like a whole scheme, he's just kind of there. In this, you know.
And I think what also is an interesting element is how heartbroken you can see that the characters of the family are when they find out he's not the real director. And I think that's very interesting, because at the end of the day, this guy is still making a movie, and he's still an artist, and he's still presenting himself as an artist. And they're like, oh no, he's not the celebrity I thought he was, and that's why they're upset. Like it's very interesting how, again, like as you were saying, it's sort of playing with what art actually is and who is the one who can say, you know, what makes something art. And I think ultimately him, you know, pretending to be somebody else and then having all the events that unfold is more interesting than if he was the actual director himself. Like I think ultimately we get a more interesting and artistic sort of outlook on things than if he just was who he said he was. So yeah, no, I think it raises a lot of really interesting questions, and it was cool to watch it in back to back with F for Fake, which then sort of is touching on a lot of the same sort of ideas, but more, I guess, about forgery then rather than imitation. But yeah, no, and beyond all that, it's just a beautiful movie to look at. Like, scenes are just that one scene at the end where they're on the motorcycle and he's driving away with the plant is just such a beautiful, it's incredible just to look at. Like, I think it's a very good, very nice movie to just look at, and the camera shots are all very good. The cinematography, while not necessarily revolutionary, is still quite beautiful and interesting. I never really found myself bored with the sets that we were looking at on the screen.
Yeah. Remember, for a documentary film, there's a lot of striking, memorable shots. I think it obviously speaks to Abbas Kiarostami as a filmmaker, very much kind of, I guess, yeah, he's kind of showing his authenticity on screen where these are expertly crafted images, and, maybe, yeah, especially for film directing as an art form, I think, you often don't, especially today, you probably often won't see the vision until it's rendered with special effects and VFX a lot of times these days. And I guess obviously things are also praised when they don't do that, when it's evidence oh, they just went to this real, I think that's another reason why people love the PTA scene from One Battle with the rolling hills. It's they were so impressed, I think, with the fact that they went to a real road, put a camera on a car probably, and just drove that road, right? But you can obviously, I think that somewhat can dismiss the authenticity I think you can get from visual effects in a lot of things. Here, it's very much more about he's obviously crafting very beautiful images. I think I'm losing my train of thought on this, but basically that authenticity should be more in how the images impact you. Obviously, that scene of a can rolling,
I was just about to mention that scene. Yeah,
it's memorable.
That was awesome. And nothing happens. It's literally
exactly.
just a can.
It really doesn't matter. It's literally just a can, but he decides to hold on it. And it's a very interesting shot, especially I guess for this kind of documentary. I think just the way it breaks the mold where you typically assume, oh, the can has to matter, or it'll lead to something smart, or even that it just might cut away, but no, he just kicks the can. It's not even B-roll necessarily. It's just used as a non-joke, I guess, in some ways. I guess some people might perceive it as a joke. It also sounds like one of the most pretentious things, okay, I'm going to make the audience watch a can roll for 8 seconds, right? I think if you said that to any other person, a lot of people, they'd be okay, this sounds boring, overall. And in some ways it is, right? At first you're okay, you're invigorated by the narrative they set up, but you're okay, why are they staying here? And honestly, you don't really get an answer why, but I think that's kind of a more interesting way to think about this film in terms of what you get. He's basically asking, okay, here's this scene, do with it what you will. Is this art? Is this me wasting time? That's kind of up to you, I guess. Kind of also asking the viewer, am I making art? But that's also saying that's ultimately up to you. The family kind of decided that this man was creating art, so was he not creating art, kind of thing? Where was he really? Yeah, in that question of what is he really guilty of, besides being saying he was someone else? But really, in some ways, they believed he was doing all the actions that man would have, that director would have done. And it's very interesting to think about how a lot of films, trying to get back to the point I was making earlier, are shrouded in this kind of secrecy where you don't really know how the sausage gets made in a lot of ways, especially with VFX these days. There's lots of clever editing and stitching tricks and visual effects tricks that have never been accessible before. And it's interesting, obviously, when you think about people debating oh, VFX that are real or not real. but mainly it's just how you view them and how it impacts the story. I think that's like obviously what they're trying to say about this guy being like, it's not about whether he's real or not, it's about how he impacted that family. And obviously they just felt very angry that they thought they were in the midst of a real creation of art, but now they think, oh, that wasn't real art that we were in the middle of. It was just a guy who was trying to pull a fast one on us.
And I think there's something interesting to come back to what you were saying about, special effects making something interesting, and sort of this assumption that almost, when you have these effects and you have these crazy sort of techniques, you can make things more memorable. But at the end of the day, the most memorable scene, I think, from this movie is the can just rolling down a hill. And I mean, think how many modern movies, Avengers movies, all these things with crazy CGI and high-tech, innovative forms of filmmaking that just aren't as memorable as something as simple as a can rolling down a hill. Like it's almost like that scene, in American Beauty with the plastic bag, where he's filming the plastic bag just literally getting tossed around. It's the same sort of idea. It's just it's all about perspective, and it's all about the way you choose to look at something that can impact your experience of the very thing itself. And I think that's what's so cool about this movie, and what's so clever about the title of Close Up is that depending on your perspective, it completely changes, the way you're going to see the movie. So I definitely want to see more of this director's stuff. This is actually the only one of his I've seen, but it definitely seems like a good gateway to get into him as a filmmaker.
Yeah. Like it's interesting. Like you can have both. I think. Like I think there's a lot of potential in VFX. Also, like when you think of like people are just missing Del Toro's Frankenstein. I saw on Twitter because of the amount of VFX. But I'm like, he's using that to craft very memorable, striking images. Maybe not as like, I wouldn't say there's like one shot that's as memorable as even the can in this film. But also, it's interesting to think also how pretentious that is to be like, oh, like this is a very important piece of art because of this can shot. Like saying that to like your average person is like, okay, buddy, what are you talking? What do you mean this can is so important, right?
Yeah.
Like there is like potential snobbery in being like, oh, because this shot doesn't have the effects and it's so simple and so unnecessary, that's why it's so special and makes this film overall special. Because to another person, it's just a waste of time. Like I think there's a lot of people who would view that shot as just completely a waste of time. And I mean, who's to blame them really? It is kind of a waste of time.
Yeah.
Like logistically speaking, if you're thinking about narrative and form and editing, but it sticks out.
But I mean, if you really boil it down, you could make the argument that art is just a waste of time. So if people are gonna, I understand where you're coming from, but for people who are just sort of saying, oh, you're a snob for saying that, it's like, okay, well, you're just not, I suppose, seeing the value of something like this. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a pretentious prick, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Maybe it's people who have maybe a little more time to waste than your average working person potentially. Like it's easier for us to say that kind of thing, but who knows?
Yeah, that's fair.
Again, this is another, like, honestly, all three of the films that we've talked about, I could see being a 10 out of 10. I'm just going to go ahead, say I gave it a 9 out of 10. But I'm also so interested in this director's work, and, like, this could remain the best one of his, and, like, in that case, like, I'll definitely need to revisit it and be, like, pretty soon. But I'm looking forward to his other films.
I think I did give this a 10 myself.
Yeah, I think you did, based
I'm
on
almost
what
positive,
I'm looking at that letterbox.
And I stand by it. I think it is. I think it is a 10. It's really quite something, and I think it's going to stand the test of time, at least amongst certain communities.
Yeah, I think it's
this one less so than La Haine, I would suggest to the average viewer. I don't know if I'd recommend it to all my friends or anything, but it is still it's still definitely something memorable.
Yeah, I think if you're interested in art, in like an academic sense, you probably would get a good amount out of it. Now we're gonna move on to, I think, High and Low, which was my number 4 on the list for something that is
Would have been my number 3.
yeah. Something
Something
number
so highly rated.
number 6 on the Letterboxd Top 250. This is a film that is, for those who've seen it, which is not as many as other classics. I think 220,000 is a little lower than even some of the other, like, like La Haine has 1 million for reference. Like, that's like 5 times as many people have logged that on Letterboxd. Same with M, 40,000 more people have logged that. Close Up has less, but that kind of makes sense overall. I think.
I think for a lot of people, any movie over 2 hours is going to push them away. As sad as that does sound, and La Haine is kind of the perfect length. I'd say for convincing people to watch it because it is so short.
Yeah, you definitely need to block.
That could add to the reason why this has fewer, views.
Yeah, I think you need to block out a significant chunk of time. And I think maybe it's so revered that you almost get intimidated by watching it. Like, you want to have, like,
yeah, definitely.
If you care about it, you want to have the perfect setting, and like maybe you want to see it in a theater, or like you obviously don't want to really be disturbed while watching something like this, in theory, because you're like,
yeah,
it's got to be one of the greats, and it is for a lot of reasons.
I think when expectation comes in there, and you're like, oh, this is on multiple, like, numerous lists of movies, this is top 10 of all time, that really impacts your viewing. And I think, at least for me, and I think we talked about this a little bit, it definitely impacted our enjoyment of it, because we had such high expectations. And it's not that those expectations weren't met, it's just that, at least for me, it's just that when it's something this high up on these lists, I'm expecting my expectations to be, shattered, and it's like this, holy smokes, this is incredible. And while I thought it was brilliant, I didn't have that sort of, wow, I'm just blown away by this moment that I maybe thought I was going to have because of how highly rated it is. And so I think this is a perfect example where if I didn't have any expectations, I would have probably had a more enjoyable experience, if I'm being entirely honest. I think those definitely hindered the way that I watched it. Just because I was, looking forward to being blown away. And then I was only mildly sort of impressed. Well, I was impressed. It's still brilliant, and we can get into that. I mean, Kurosawa, he's a legend. There's no way around it. His use of blocking in this movie in particular is just unbelievable. Every scene you could literally take a camera, and in almost every scene take a photo, and you could put it on a wall somewhere, and I'd be like, that's a cool picture,
Yeah.
Like, it's so much of it is just incredible to look at. Narratively wise, thematically, I think it's a lot more interesting than it is structurally, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I'd agree.
The things that he's dealing with, and the sort of almost not underground, but the less presentable side of Japanese culture that people weren't really talking about in the 60s when he made this is really sort of cool to see in a movie. And the distinction, or I guess the difference between the higher and the lower parts of society is all very cool. But narratively, it kind of just boils down to a whodunit, essentially. And that maybe was slightly disappointing for me, because I kind of expected more there a little bit, just because of what I'd heard other people say. And so that definitely hindered my experience, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think, like, you kind of maybe, it's expected to be a whodunit with, like, tension within every scene. But the film, like, kind of pulls back from that, becomes, like, almost somewhat, like, a pretty different film in some ways. Like, I think that tension is obviously very palpable in the first 40, 50 minutes or so when they're just in the apartment, which I think is a brilliant choice to just lock us in there. That is, like, an all-time sequence, for sure.
Yeah,
like,
that is a great sequence.
All-time first act, for sure. Like, I think there's no doubt about that. It doesn't really necessarily set you up or get you to expect what he brings you into afterwards. And obviously, like you said, it's a very interesting thing to be like, to take a country that I think is often so revered, especially on the world stage, as like a clean, pristine society that has like no issues,
Yeah.
and that like the culture is so strict that like anyone who fell off of it would not be visible anymore. And Kurosawa's choice to
Yeah.
make them visible is a very strong choice, I think, especially for this society. And considering also his other films, when you think of his other films, you think of very, honorable samurai, and even he breaks
Yeah.
some of those like stereotypes down in some of those films. But you think of very honorable men, and that's what you kind of start with. You start with this, high up businessman who ultimately makes this, I guess, the more moral choice. He gives up the opportunity to have more financial control over his life to save this boy's life, even
Yeah.
if it's not his own boy. And obviously, I think that train sequence is like the way they set that up logistically is really cool. And again, having just watched Highest to Lowest, like you can appreciate that so much more. I think some of the ways
Yeah.
that Spike Lee approaches it was a little crazy because he makes it a lot that getting the money part so much more convoluted.
Do you think
Compared
it's
to
worth watching?
I think it is, especially if you're like a fan of Spike Lee in general. And I think it's just also an interesting comparison. Like, again, it makes you appreciate the first act of High and Low a lot more, honestly, because I think, yeah, Spike doesn't go for it at all, but like the framing and the blocking and the way he handles, the tension of the police not being seen because of how threatening he is to the boy over the potential police involvement is a source of tension that
Yeah.
Spike never plays with. And so you can appreciate so much more how High and Low approaches it. And I think also, like, I think he's obviously just taking it into a completely different culture. He's taking it into New York, African American, um, you know, and like other diverse communities, cultures in a way that even I think may be somewhat alienating to other Americans in some ways, where it's not immediately obvious what the low part is. And I think it's also just a different approach where here the Gondo, the main businessman who's the one being held, like being ransomed,
Yeah.
is distant from the hunt for him. I liked Spike's choice to actually involve Denzel Washington's character into the hunt for him, kind of showing that he was a man who used to be part of like this street, like, from lower income areas, and knows like kind of how they may approach
Mhm.
a situation like this. Whereas Gondo, this character, is intentionally like very distant from it, lets the police kind of handle it, and even the
Yeah.
police, like in that one chase scene through the like kind of the heroin alley and all of the things that happen there, it's very unclean. Like they're not comfortable whatsoever there. The police, yeah, I
Yeah.
think when the police are chasing them through that, yeah, they're not comfortable whatsoever. That's very interesting that like he brings them into that area, because it's not, yeah, like I guess it's high and low very much in the way that, yeah, like the low part isn't even the train sequence or like that whole part. It is that like very ending once like you realize this whole scheme of where he literally uses another couple who are drug addicts to try to carry out
Yeah.
this plan, which obviously, doesn't make him morally redeemable whatsoever, but is just also another very interesting part
Yeah.
of the film that they don't delve into at all in Spike Lee's version, where like the guy is the guy, how he's caught is pretty simple. They don't treat it as like a very
Yeah.
complicated thing. Because here the police are somewhat revered, I think, obviously. Like you see how much detail, like he has you sit
And
there,
that
like you listen to the detail and procedure and
that
different
scene, yeah, yeah.
groups that are doing different tasks to try to figure out what to do for this man. I think the idea is similar though. Like you can see how much the police are prioritizing his issue almost more than the poor people involved in this situation, kind of showing that like again social services aren't always seemingly, actually going to help everyone equally. It is going to
Mhm.
maybe help those who have the resources, I guess, to, in theory, fund them in the first place. But
Yeah.
again, yeah, very interesting from like that point of view. And again, I think his filmmaking is, and like also the thing with the backpack being burned and creating a dye and that being one of the instances,
that was cool.
the only instance of color, is a very cool way to kind of, provide hints. Spike kind of does that with like a rap song, which seems a little more inherently not as intelligent, but I think kind of makes enough sense for the characters in the film. Again, very different characters.
Right.
Because yeah, you also don't get as much satisfaction in how because you kind of think in High and Low that the reason he was kidnapped is related to the takeover that Gondo is trying to do of the shoe company. It's not at all. It's literally not related to that whatsoever. Which going in with that knowledge, I think would have helped. But you kind of expect, it's like a convoluted plan connected to someone who wants his company taken down. But no, it's just a guy who looked up at his house and was like, man, fuck you. That's literally it, He's like, fuck your house. Fuck that shit.
You have too much money.
Yeah, you have too much money. Give me some of it, kind of thing. That's like literally it. Which is like, honestly, like it has more power. I think when you think about it, it's like, if you have a house like that that's so pretentious over this whole community, surely one person
you're kind of just
is gonna get pissed off and not really care what happens to anyone.
Constantly asserting.
Yeah.
It's like a constant beacon and reminder that this guy is wealthier than you. It's kind of a douchebag move.
Yeah.
And it's still very prevalent today. I mean, the disparity of wealth has probably only gotten worse than it has in the 60s. So again, another movie that is definitely gonna stand and last and be watched by people for a while, I would say. I would hope.
Yeah.
I hope this movie and this director doesn't fall out of fashion. He's got a lot of interesting things to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it falls in like this group of films with like houses that people just get kind of annoyed at, like these modern, like there's really great films that I love that use a modern home to just like kind of show how ridiculous and pretentious these characters are. Because like I feel like, I don't know, there's not as much care going into a home at that point. It feels like it's just almost it's impossible to feel like you're creating like how I feel like the typical like human caring household is supposed to be like when you have like a giant modern block of a house, and like that's kind of emphasized here as well. Kind of relating to your Discord thing that you always have on your profile.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Which happens to be a Ready Player One quote, but
okay.
Which if we ever talk about the Ready Player One movie, I think that'll be the most negative I'll ever be in my life. There are very few films that disappointed me more than that one, but it's not the point of this.
Yeah. All right. I gave High and Low an 8 out of 10, and I guess for those who are curious, I gave highest to lowest a 7 out of 10. It has some pretty out there parts.
I gave it a 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the best Kurosawa movie I've seen, but it's definitely an important one. And what's cool about it is that it's different from his other movies. It has sort of a different feel than a lot of his samurai movies.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. All right. I think we'll more briefly touch on the bottom two, since I think we've wanted to stay positive. Not that F for Fake was the other one we briefly mentioned, which we watched in a double feature with Close Up. I gave it an 8 out of 10, directed by Orson Welles.
I think I did as well. Oh no, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Oh jeez.
Yeah. A little more negative.
A little more harsh.
I feel like it takes
cool.
a long time to talk about all the things that this film is about, and also requires spoiling it. So I think we'll just not do that, since I don't think we're going to be able to talk about it in detail right now. But I think we would recommend it.
It's definitely worth watching. Yeah, it's a cool movie, and it's talking about cool things, and it's definitely worth seeing. But I would put it as the lowest on the recommendations of these 5. It's the one I would recommend the least. I think Close Up does a much better job of handling what is art than this movie, and I think Close Up does that because it's less blatant. It doesn't just say we're going to handle the problem of what is art. This movie very clearly outlines what it's trying to do. At least I think so. And I'm sure there definitely are other elements going on that I maybe missed. But I just found it harder to get invested in. And the fact that there's no real narrative too, is fine. You know, not every movie has to be a narrative, but I think Close Up does a better job of handling, you know, what art is itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think F for Fake is a lot easier to dismiss as like, this is just a bunch of pretentious art snobs who decide to, you know, team up with Orson Welles and just kind of tell you what art is, and also lie to your face. Just because they think it's funny, I guess. Crazy editing, though. Got to mention that.
Yeah, the editing is
for 1973.
Again,
it's crazy.
Again, the problem with talking about these movies is that like none of them are bad. These are all, you know, well, I guess we're getting to maybe one that's not great, but like a lot of these are just very impressive pieces of movie making. So any of our criticism here is obviously also comes with a lot of praise for these filmmakers and these movies themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, or the influence that man has had. Like, there's no, or not entertaining, less, I got less out of it, personally.
Yeah. Should we save the other two for another time, maybe? Or what do you think?
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Right.
They're less sort of, there's less to really say about, you know, weapons and 28 years later.
Yeah. I was thinking about Chungking Express and Black Phone 2.
Oh, yes. I forgot about those two as well.
Yeah.
There's actually more than I thought. Yeah, Chungking Express we could talk about for a little while, so we can maybe save those for later.
Yeah. I guess if you haven't already seen Weapons or 28 Years Later, we would recommend them. I don't think they're as strong as these other films. I mean, they're obviously, that's unfair. You're talking about a couple of films that are very good for their year, but I don't think will necessarily be watched in 50 years. Maybe Weapons can get somewhat of a highlight. We'll see what the rest of Zach Cregger's filmography is like. I think that would be a measure of it. 28 Days is a pretty important. I mean, it's relatively important. Like I could see this trilogy sort of being important just because Danny Boyle has sort of established himself as a worthwhile director. Not his best work by any means, but 28 Years is still pretty interesting. Again, we can get into that another time. Yeah. And I guess
concluding thoughts, which of these 5 would you recommend the most?
I guess I think we kind of agree that La Haine would be the one that we'd probably throw on with whoever the most likely. After talking about them, like I honestly I do want to show Close Up to someone, you know, another person, because I think that's like I mean, just for different reasons, like, you know,
they all that is true. It's hard to answer that question because to some people M would be very interesting, and to others they may not see it in the same way.
Yeah, like if I was showing it to someone in my classes, I'd probably pick M. If I was showing it to someone I went to film school with or know based on movies, I'd probably be like, let's watch Close Up. Yeah.
Fair enough. I think I would agree. I think La Haine is the most the best for the widest audience, and I think it's a good movie to sort of get people to break the barrier between, you know, modern movies and black and white subtitled movies that so easily scares people away, because it really isn't, you know, when you compare it to M, which is a black and white movie that has to be black and white, there's just such a different feel between the two. Anytime a director intentionally chooses to use black and white, I think sometimes it can be just kind of pretentious and unnecessary, but I think La Haine is the perfect example of how well it's used to suit the story.
All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap up now. Thank you guys so much for watching Dead Film Critics Society podcast as always. Been here with Spencer, And you'll probably see him again in a future thing. I'm sure we'll talk about maybe our top 10 from the past year or something like that. Or maybe just talk about some of the films that we haven't. Yeah, we could probably throw in Oscar predictions, especially once award season really gets going. With Golden Globes are actually only in like a month. Nominations, I think, will be in like a month. So really, it's not that far away from like people being like, here was the best of the year. Even though I think there's a lot both of us still want to see from this past year. You more maybe than me, because I know I've talked to you about films that I've watched from TIFF, and
you had the privilege of being at TIFF.
Yes, I did. Yeah, so there is that. But I don't know, there's still even films that I've wanted to see that either just weren't at TIFF.
I mean, I'm excited about Marty Supreme.
Or I missed.
I'll tell you that.
Marty Supreme is definitely up there. Sentimental value for me was a big thing I missed at TIFF. The Running Man with Edgar Wright is definitely something I want to see. I told you about No Other Choice in Hamnet a lot. Like
number one.
Those are.
Same with Frankenstein, but Frankenstein I can watch in like a week, so that's exciting.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about Frank. I'm curious to hear what you think of it. Obviously, as a book reader, seeing as most book readers have not liked this film version as much as the book is.
I am gonna,
not as much as other people.
Blank slate.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna watch it as an adaptation of the book. I'm gonna watch it as a standalone.
Watch it as a Guillermo del Toro original, even though it's technically not, obviously. But I feel like that's the approach you want to go with it. It's like, here's his new story, obviously inspired clearly from something else, but that doesn't really matter. Yeah. So we'll talk about all those things probably eventually in the future. All right. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Bye-bye.